The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Senior Guard Captain James Morrison adjusted his red tunic for what he believed would be his final time. 28 years of dedicated service to the Crown had brought him to this moment, standing in his quarters with a letter of resignation clutched in his weathered hands. Morrison had served under 3 monarchs, witnessed countless ceremonies, and protected the royal family through thick and thin. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned, until yesterday when the palace announced Queen Camilla's new official title change from Queen Consort to simply Queen. The announcement had sent shockwaves through the royal household staff, but nowhere was the reaction more intense than among the ceremonial guards. These men and women had sworn oaths to protect the legitimate monarchy, and Morrison felt that this title change crossed a line that challenged everything he stood for. Walking through the palace corridors, Morrison remembered the day he first put on the uniform. He was barely 20 years old, fresh-faced and eager to serve. His father had been a palace guard before him, and his grandfather before that. The Morrison family had served the crown for over a century, through world wars, royal scandals, and changing times. But this felt different. Morrison had always respected the traditions and protocols that governed royal titles. When King Charles married Camilla in 2005, it was understood that she would be Princess Consort when Charles became king. Later, this changed to Queen Consort, which Morrison had accepted as part of the natural evolution of royal protocol. However, the recent move to drop the word consort entirely seemed to Morrison like an attempt to rewrite history and royal tradition. In his mind, there was only one queen in recent memory who had earned that title through birthright and decades of service, and that was Queen Elizabeth II. Morrison's concerns weren't just personal. He had spoken quietly with other senior guards, and many shared his feelings. They believed that Camilla, while now legally queen, had not earned the historical weight that came with the simple title of queen without qualification. The guard captain had tried to keep his feelings private, but yesterday's staff meeting had changed everything. When the palace communications director explained the new protocols for addressing Queen Camilla, Morrison had asked a simple question about the constitutional basis for the change. The response had been diplomatic, but firm. The palace emphasized that this was the king's decision and that all staff were expected to respect and implement the new protocols immediately. Morrison had nodded politely, but felt a growing unease in his stomach. That evening, Morrison had gone home to his small flat near the palace and sat with his wife Margaret over dinner. They had talked about his concerns, and she had listened patiently as he explained his dilemma. Margaret understood her husband's dedication to duty and tradition, but she also worried about the consequences of taking a stand. The next morning, Morrison had made his decision. He would not publicly object to Queen Camilla's title, but he could not in good conscience continue serving in a role that required him to enforce protocols he fundamentally disagreed with. As he prepared to submit his resignation, Morrison thought about the other guards who might be watching his actions. He knew that his decision would likely become public knowledge within the palace walls, and he wondered if others would follow his lead or if he would stand alone. The irony was not lost on him that he was potentially ending his career over a woman who had, by all accounts, tried her best to serve the crown with dignity. Morrison didn't dislike Camilla personally, but he felt that some aspects of royal tradition should remain unchanged, especially when it came to titles that carried such historical significance. Morrison also understood that his actions might be viewed as disloyal or even treasonous by some. But in his mind, true loyalty to the crown meant upholding the traditions and protocols that had sustained the monarchy for centuries, even when those in power sought to change them. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders as he walked toward the administrative offices. He knew that once he submitted his resignation letter, there would be no going back. His career, his pension, and his family's legacy of service would all be affected by this moment. But Morrison also knew that he had to be able to look at himself in the mirror each morning. If he stayed silent and continued serving while harboring these deep concerns, he felt he would be betraying not just his own principles, but also the oath he had sworn to protect the legitimate traditions of the monarchy. As he reached the administrative wing of the palace, Morrison took a deep breath and steeled himself for what was to come. He had no idea that his quiet resignation would soon become national news, sparking debates about royal protocol, tradition, and the nature of legitimate authority within the British monarchy. The corridors were busier than usual, with staff members hurrying between meetings and preparing for upcoming royal engagements. Morrison nodded politely to colleagues as he passed, wondering if they could sense the gravity of what he was about to do. In just a few minutes, Senior Guard Captain James Morrison would hand over his resignation letter, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge the palace's authority and raise questions about the true meaning of royal legitimacy in modern Britain. The administrative officer, Mrs. Helen Patterson, looked up from her desk with surprise when Captain Morrison knocked on her door. She had known James for 15 years and had never seen him look so serious and determined. His usual friendly demeanor was replaced by a formal, almost military bearing that suggested something significant was about to happen. Morrison entered the office and placed his resignation letter on Patterson's desk without saying a word. She picked up the envelope, noticed the formal palace seal, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Her face went pale as she began reading the carefully worded document. In his letter, Morrison had explained his position clearly, but respectfully. He wrote that while he held no personal animosity toward Queen Camilla, he could not continue serving in a role that required him to enforce what he considered to be an illegitimate change to royal protocol. He cited his oath of service to uphold royal traditions and stated that the title change violated the historical precedent that had governed royal consort titles for generations. Patterson set down the letter and looked at Morrison with concern. She knew that this resignation would create enormous problems for the palace administration. Morrison was not just any guard. He was the senior captain responsible for training new recruits and coordinating security protocols for major royal events. Morrison explained to Patterson that he had tried to find another way to handle his concerns, but ultimately felt that remaining silent would compromise his integrity. He emphasized that this was not a personal attack on Queen Camilla, but rather a principled stand about constitutional and traditional matters. Within an hour of Morrison's resignation being filed, word had spread throughout the palace staff. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some staff members quietly supported Morrison's position, while others viewed his actions as inappropriate and disloyal. The tension in the palace corridors was palpable as employees whispered among themselves about the unprecedented situation. By afternoon, 3 other senior guards had requested meetings with the administrative office. 2 of them submitted their own resignation letters, citing similar concerns about the title change. The third, Sergeant William Hayes, requested a transfer to different duties that would not require him to use the new royal protocols. The palace communications team was caught completely off guard by the developing situation. They had expected some minor grumbling about the title change, but never anticipated that senior staff members would resign over the issue. Emergency meetings were called to discuss damage control and media strategy. Palace sources later revealed that King Charles himself was informed of the resignations within hours of their submission. The king was reportedly surprised and concerned about the situation, as he had not expected such strong opposition from within the palace staff. He had believed that the title change was a natural progression that would be accepted without controversy. Queen Camilla was also briefed on the situation. Sources close to the Queen suggested that she was deeply troubled by the idea that palace staff were resigning because of opposition to her title. She had always been sensitive to criticism about her role in the royal family and had worked hard to gain acceptance from the British public. The first media reports about Morrison's resignation appeared in the evening papers. A palace insider had leaked the story to a royal correspondent, and within hours, the news was being discussed on television and social media. The headlines were dramatic and divisive, with some outlets supporting Morrison's principled stand and others criticizing his actions as undermining the monarchy. Morrison, meanwhile, had returned home to face the reality of his decision. His phone was ringing constantly with calls from journalists wanting to interview him, but he had decided to maintain his dignity by refusing all media requests. He felt that his resignation letter spoke for itself and that engaging with the press would only sensationalize the situation. The reaction from the public was swift and polarized. Social media platforms were filled with debates about royal tradition, legitimacy, and the role of palace staff in challenging royal decisions. Some people praised Morrison as a hero standing up for constitutional principles, while others condemned him as disloyal and disrespectful. Veterans organizations began weighing in on the controversy, with some supporting Morrison's right to act according to his conscience, and others arguing that military and royal service required absolute obedience to authority. The debate touched on fundamental questions about duty, loyalty, and individual conscience in service to the crown. By the end of the day, palace officials realized that they were facing a public relations crisis that could undermine the carefully managed transition of Camilla's role. The resignation of respected senior staff members had given credibility to criticisms of the title change that the palace had hoped to avoid. Emergency consultations were held with constitutional experts and public relations specialists. The palace needed to find a way to address the controversy without appearing to back down from the king's decision, while also preventing further resignations that could cripple palace operations. Morrison's wife, Margaret, watched the evening news with a mixture of pride and worry. She supported her husband's decision, but was concerned about the financial implications of his resignation and the potential backlash against their family. The Morrison children, now adults with their own families, were also grappling with the public attention surrounding their father's actions. Late that evening, Morrison received a phone call from his former colleague, Deputy Captain Sarah Williams. She informed him that palace security was reviewing all staff members for potential security risks related to the controversy. Morrison was surprised by this development, as he had never considered that his resignation might be viewed as a security threat. The conversation with Williams revealed that the palace was taking the situation very seriously and was concerned about the potential for further staff defections or public protests. Morrison assured Williams that he had no intention of causing further problems and that his only goal had been to act according to his conscience. As the first day of the crisis drew to a close, it became clear that Morrison's resignation had sparked a much larger debate about the nature of royal authority and the limits of institutional change. The palace would need to carefully navigate the coming days to prevent the controversy from escalating further and potentially damaging the monarchy's reputation. The following morning brought unprecedented media attention to Buckingham Palace. Television crews lined the streets outside the palace gates, and reporters were stationed at every entrance, hoping to catch interviews with staff members or any glimpse of the royal family. The Morrison resignation had become the top story on every major news outlet in Britain and was gaining international attention. Palace officials held an emergency meeting at 7 in the morning to develop a comprehensive response strategy. The meeting included senior communications staff, legal advisors, and representatives from the king's private office. The consensus was that the palace needed to address the situation quickly and decisively to prevent further damage to the royal family's reputation. King Charles himself attended part of the meeting, expressing his frustration with how the title change had been handled. According to sources present at the meeting, the king felt that the communications team had failed to anticipate and prepare for potential opposition to Queen Camilla's new title. He was particularly concerned about the impact on Camilla, who was already dealing with renewed criticism about her role in the monarchy. The palace's first official response came in the form of a carefully worded statement released at 10 in the morning. The statement emphasized that Queen Camilla's title change was legally sound and had been approved through proper constitutional channels. It also expressed regret that some staff members had chosen to resign, but maintained that their concerns were based on misunderstandings about royal protocol. Morrison, meanwhile, was experiencing the full weight of his decision. His phone had not stopped ringing since the previous evening, and journalists were camped outside his modest home. His neighbors were being approached for interviews, and his adult children were facing questions at their workplaces. The family was discovering that taking a principled stand in such a public manner came with significant personal costs. By midday, Morrison had decided to issue his own statement through a lawyer, as the media attention was becoming overwhelming. His statement reiterated that his resignation was based solely on constitutional concerns and that he held no personal animosity toward Queen Camilla. He emphasized his decades of loyal service and his deep respect for the monarchy as an institution. The public reaction continued to be sharply divided. Polling conducted by major news organizations showed that the British public was almost evenly split on whether Morrison's actions were justified. Older respondents tended to support his position on royal tradition, while younger people were more likely to view his actions as outdated and unnecessarily rigid. Several prominent historians and constitutional experts began weighing in on the controversy. Some supported Morrison's interpretation of royal protocol, arguing that the distinction between queen and queen consort carried important historical and legal significance. Others maintained that the monarchy had always evolved with the times and that the title change was a natural progression. The most significant development came in the afternoon, when it was revealed that Morrison's resignation had inspired similar actions beyond the palace walls. 3 members of the Yeomen of the Guard, who provide ceremonial security for royal events, had submitted letters questioning the title change. Additionally, several ceremonial military units were reportedly experiencing internal discussions about the appropriateness of the new protocols. Queen Camilla made her first public appearance since the controversy began when she attended a previously scheduled charity event in London. The media scrutinized her every expression and gesture, looking for signs of how the situation was affecting her. Camilla appeared composed and dignified, but sources close to the royal family suggested that she was deeply hurt by the implication that her title was somehow illegitimate. The charity event provided Queen Camilla with an opportunity to demonstrate her commitment to royal duties despite the controversy. She met with representatives from several organizations, participated in ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and gave a brief speech about the importance of community service. Her professional handling of the event was noted positively by some media outlets. However, the presence of protesters outside the charity event highlighted the divisive nature of the situation. A small group of demonstrators carried signs supporting Morrison's position, while counter-protesters defended Queen Camilla's right to the title. Police maintained order, but the visible public disagreement added another layer of complexity to the crisis. Palace sources revealed that behind the scenes, intensive discussions were taking place about how to resolve the situation. Some advisors suggested that a compromise might be necessary, perhaps involving a more gradual transition to the new title or additional ceremonial recognition of royal traditions. Others argued that backing down would set a dangerous precedent and undermine royal authority. Morrison spent the afternoon meeting with his lawyer to discuss the potential legal and financial implications of his resignation. While he had acted on principle, he was beginning to understand that his decision would have long-lasting consequences for his family's financial security and his own future employment prospects. The international media began picking up the story, with royal correspondents from around the world analyzing the implications for the British monarchy. The controversy was being framed as a test of the institution's ability to modernize while maintaining traditional legitimacy. Foreign commentators were particularly interested in how the situation reflected broader debates about institutional change in democratic societies. By evening, it became clear that the Morrison resignation had evolved into something much larger than a single staff member's protest. The controversy had touched on fundamental questions about tradition, legitimacy, and change that resonated far beyond the specific issue of Queen Camilla's title. As the day drew to a close, palace officials realized that they were dealing with a crisis that could not be resolved through simple public relations management. The situation required careful consideration of constitutional principles, public opinion, and the long-term reputation of the monarchy. Morrison, reflecting on the day's events from his home, understood that his decision to resign had set in motion forces beyond his control. What had begun as a personal act of conscience had become a national debate about the nature of royal authority and tradition in modern Britain. Whether this would ultimately strengthen or weaken the monarchy remained to be seen, but Morrison remained convinced that he had done the right thing according to his own principles and understanding of his duty to the crown.